Okay, so let's go for a walk. Got the dog Bolly here, and got a drone up in the sky, and I'm not quite sure how well he's going to adjust to it, but he seems to have forgotten about it now, which is good. And we're heading off from Blackthorpe Barn. So we're going to go for a little bit of an experimental walk and go through a bit of woodland and some fields and see what we can see. It's a beautiful day, and I think it should be rather nice for a walk. So we're setting off from the Blackthorpe Barn, and we're going through one of the car parks now as we head off for a bit of woodland. It all looks a bit bleak here at the moment because this is a car park really designed for our busy weekends at the Blackthorpe Barn, but in a few days' time this will be full of people. Bolly can't quite decide what to do about this drone, but I think he's beginning to ignore it now, which is good. So the wood that we're coming up to is called the Downs Wood, and it's a very pretty place, I think, and so we shall be disappearing in there in a minute, and we'll have to decide whether or not we can take the drone in there with the power lines and the trees. Bolly's found something interesting. Come on, Bolly, we don't want you there all day. Come along. And off we go. So we're going into the Downs Wood now. Have a little look to see what we can see here today. It's one of my favourite local woods, and it's really handy that it's so close to the barn so everybody can enjoy it. I'll try and point out one or two of the trees as we go by. There are some very beautiful lime trees in here and some old oaks. So this tree is one of my favourite lime trees in this area. It's a fabulous tree, really, really big. Branches going on and on forever and ever. And so I see this every time I go on this walk. And this is an oak with an amazing scar on the side, which small children think is a fairy door. And in fact, of course, it's just an old wound from maybe 100 years ago or something like that. Let's see what else we can find. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? I love the light. I often think the most interesting light is where you're actually looking more or less straight into it.
Yeah.
If you can sort of just avoid the direct sun, that sort of nearly the sun is so good. This is a sycamore tree, not a native tree, but they are rather fine when they get big. A lot of people call them weeds, which I think is rather unfair. And as other trees get diseases and things, we should be very glad of trees that can survive in our climate. So I treasure them as well. The woods are changing all the time at the moment as the leaves are falling off the deciduous trees, and from day to day the light levels change as we move from autumn into winter. That's a wonderful old stump here which I look at every time I go past. Some people like to sit on that in the summer. Unfortunately, some children made a fire in it a few years ago, which has spoilt its character somewhat, but it's still lovely. And then you catch the sunlight in the tree canopy from the silver birches on my left here. I'm not sure if the camera can pick up on that, but that's really very, very beautiful. And you can see the larches here. As they're losing their needles, they're going golden brown before they fall off. The larch is a deciduous conifer, which is quite unusual really. And very beautiful tree. You can see them here in the canopy. Hello. We're making a little film about our walk. Have a nice walk. Bolly always wants to turn right on this walk, and I'm very often trying to turn left, but today we are going right, so he'll be very pleased. And there's a really nice sort of view as you emerge from the wood into the fields. On your left, there's Rougham Church appearing through the hedge line. It's a beautiful old church, which we'll visit on another walk. And one of the features of this particular walk is the ditch along here, which almost always seems to have water running in it, which I absolutely love. It's such an unusual sound here in Suffolk, where we don't have rivers rushing through with rocks and that sort of thing, creating a sound of water. Hoping I might be able to pick up the sound in a minute, and maybe we can hear it. I don't know if you can hear this, but that is the sound of running water. And I think that's just magical. The land around here is so flat, but even in our landscape here, there are little tiny valleys that catch the water and take the streams down as they work their way down to bigger rivers. And so on we go on our walk. It's a beautiful sunny day, and now there's another great big oak tree coming up on my left front, which is one of thousands we have here in Rougham. It's such a wonderful heritage to enjoy these trees. They pepper the landscape. If I just do a little pan round, you can see on the horizon all the way around oak trees, our legacy. We plant them here every year. We try to look after them, try to care for them. Very, very seldom cut any down. You can see the hedge line here, which had to be chopped back, but you can see how it's all shooting from where all the cuts are. And this is what keeps a hedge dense. If you don't cut a hedge, eventually it becomes really straggly and the bottom of it becomes very thin. And that's no good. It's no good for wildlife, which is a lot of the point of a hedge. It's partly as a windbreak, and then when it gets thin, that's no good. And it's also a place for wildlife to hide, to live, to move around the landscape. And for that it needs a thick bottom to it. Good morning. And there we have a maple. Looking gorgeous, isn't it? It loses its last leaves, and now comes another huge oak tree. So we've got the lovely sunlight coming on this tree, and we're going to have a look at it from all sides and see how it looks as you get higher up. The fantastic light on this tree, And these leaves, I always think oak leaves don't really go that golden before they drop. But here today, with the way this light is falling, it looks absolutely fabulous. Wonderful, wonderful tree. We're going to try and do tree portraits of lots of trees on the estate, all the different sorts which we can find that are growing freely out in the wild so that we can get round them properly. And this is our first try with an oak. Right, so off we go again. We've turned right now and we're going to be walking along a footpath which runs between a couple of fields, and you'll see on the side of the path here a whole load of oak trees. I love counting the trees as I go along here. You can see some of them are trees that we've planted ourselves that are in these tubes, but there are lots of naturally regenerated ones as well, and actually there are many more of those than there are the ones in the tubes. And it's our plan to create a hedge here in the next few months, so we'll be incorporating as many of these oak trees as we possibly can into the hedge. And this is the sort of thing we do here from time to time, to try to increase the natural value of our landscape as well as improving the beauty. So we'll be creating a wildlife corridor that will run down here to enable mice and all sorts of creatures to move around in the landscape without being exposed too much to danger from birds and that sort of thing. And in the fields here we're growing what's called a green cover crop, which includes types of pea and all sorts of nitrogen fixing plants. And this just grows here for a few months after harvest to keep the green cover, which stops nutrients being leached out of the ground, and it helps to incorporate fibre and plant fibre as you eventually incorporate this stuff into the ground, and it increases the nitrogen. And here, if I can show you, is one of the naturally regenerated oaks, which look every bit as healthy. And I think there are something like 30 naturally regenerated oaks along here, which is absolutely gorgeous. I love it. One day this is going to be a very, very oak-rich hedge line, even though it looks a bit bare at the moment. And further off we can see, as we approach the road, Bolly seems to have found something interesting here, so I have to wait for him for a little bit. He is rather keen on smelling things out and having a little wee, so I'll just give him a chance for a moment, because this is his walk too. You mustn't forget that. You can see as we approach the road at the end of this path, this line of oak trees, which I think were all planted at the time that the first Rougham Hall was built in the 1680s. So they've been part of the landscape here for several hundred years. And I've planted oaks here 40 years ago along that hedge line. These smaller oaks there are the ones I planted. And the ones here that we're seeing just in front here have been planted by our farm manager the other year. So we keep, every few years we go and have another go at it, because sometimes if you have a drought or something like that, the oaks don't take. You can lose a whole year's worth of oaks, and that has happened from time to time. So you just have to keep doing it. And now with climate change, we have to begin to think of other sorts of trees to plant as well. Oaks are very much the sort of symbol of the landscape here, but we can't be sure that in hundreds of years' time that they'll be able to cope with the climate. So we're beginning to consider other sorts of trees to actually have instead, or as well as probably. And they could include lime trees. Well, we want to pick native trees if we can, so lime trees are a possibility. Sweet chestnut are sort of semi-native, they're very beautiful, and we consider them as an option. And then people are beginning to look at trees from other parts of the world. There was a school of thought which existed for quite a few decades, and it still exists now, that the only environmentally rich trees to plant are native trees. And there's a lot of sense in that, but if your native trees begin to not be able to cope with the changing climate, you have to consider planting other things as well. And one of the things which is being suggested really quite a lot at the moment is hickory from the United States. I don't know much about it, but it's certainly something which we're going to have to consider here in the future, along with other varieties. Oaks, unfortunately, are attacked by several different diseases at the moment, and so even though, despite that, we are still planting masses of them in a belief that they will survive, but we have to cover all options. And it's really the very ancient trees we have which we're particularly concerned about, and we have to try to find ways of saving them. Here we've got some of the roadside trees I planted 40 years ago, and then the trees from 1680. We've turned the corner again, and we've now got the field on our right with this cover crop on it, which is part of the regenerative farming that we do here at Rougham, which is to try to look after the soil. And to look after the soil, you need to have as much organic matter in it as you can to encourage worms and all the natural life forms that exist in the soil. And we take the soil terribly seriously. We put muck onto the soil and we grow these cover crops. So that's what's happening here. And some sheep will probably come and eat this later on during the winter. And then in the spring it will be sown with another crop. We're just crossing the route of the old Roman road which ran through Rougham. I think Bolly's getting used to the drone now, which is good. Another gorgeous tree. Not the same light level on this one, but absolutely fabulous all the same. One of the issues we have with growing these ancient oak trees along public roads is safety, because as they get older they can lose branches and they can sometimes blow down. And so we have to do things like that, where we had to cut the tree down but we left it as a stump, which is what's called standing dead wood, and that's an important environmental asset. And there's a tree in front of you now which we had to take the top out of because that was getting really quite dangerous. It's beside the road, it's also near somebody's house and power lines, and so we had really quite a problem to deal with that one. But we managed to save one side branch there, and we hope that the tree will live on now. Sometimes the shock of doing that kills them, and that's unfortunate, but we do our very best to try to save them where we can. So we're walking past these houses. And just after the garage ahead of you, we'll be diving left into the wood again to make our way back towards the Blackthorpe Barn. And at that point, We'll have to work out quite what we do with the drone. Maybe it'll go up, maybe it'll come down. I don't know. So here's the little entrance into the wood. It's almost quite secretive. And in we go. Now, on we go into the wood. It's the same Downs wood that we were in before, but we're coming through it at a different angle. And we're going to see some other trees in here this time. There's a wonderful old veteran oak, massive stump to see, and there's a yew tree in here as well, which is quite fun. The yew tree is coming up ahead of us now. It's not an ancient tree, but it's growing naturally here in the wood, and so that's really quite special. And to its left there's a holly. These evergreen trees are a real asset in the winter. And then here is this oak stump. It's still alive. There's still bits of green here. And that tree was pollarded. The fact that it's got all those branches coming out at about 10 foot up is an indication that it would have been pollarded in the old days, which means chopping the branches off for firewood or to use for carpentry or shipbuilding. And it indicates that that tree must be at least the same age as those roadside ones from 1680, could even be a lot older. I think it's probably a lot older. And now we're walking under some larch trees, which again have got their wonderful golden needles at this time of year as they prepare for the winter and drop them in carpets on the floor. More oaks everywhere. It's a dead one, which it's sad, but it's what happens. And again, standing dead wood is of value. Come on, Bolly, we're going to go this way around. And now some box. Lots of different things growing in this wood. And over here is another lime tree. And this lime tree is covered in suckers at the bottom. You can see all this sort of frithy growth at the bottom, which is hugely valuable for wildlife. Some limes do that, and then some of them don't. It's a genetic thing, I think. And so the one behind us on the other side, if I just turn round, that one, which we looked at before, doesn't have any suckers at all. So we've got two examples of lime trees here, which are both really beautiful. As we head back through the wood, suddenly we see a couple of memories from World War II. There are a couple of old air raid shelters here from the war, which now sink slowly into the landscape, covered in leaves and moss and that sort of thing. And they're becoming really quite beautiful as part of the history of the place and part of the history of the landscape. So I'm going to go left. Come on, Bolly. And ahead of us, the Blackthorpe Barn car park reappears. A group of birch trees here on the left. We're beginning to look quite, they're white bark, looking fantastic in this light. Walking under yet another oak tree. And this little group of oaks here grew up because there was a fence line here once, and some acorns must have just got planted there by some birds, probably a jay or something like that. And so they've become a little group of trees which form a feature in the car park. On the right there's another oak. That one is, I'm afraid, now beginning to die back. You can see there's dead branches as well as ones with leaves. And this is an impact of climate change, and in a few years' time I'm afraid that tree will probably be dead, which is very sad, but this is why we have to plan ahead. And ahead of us is a wonderful lime avenue which leads down to the Blackthorpe Barn from the public road at the other end. Most of the leaves have now fallen off, so it gets into its winter dress. And we're approaching the barn now, which we can begin to see on the left as our walk comes to an end. And here you can see a lime tree which is doing a lot of this suckering that I was talking about. It's still got some of its leaves. And the barn looks busy today. People are coming for Christmas trees, the Christmas shop and the cafe. And so I think this walk comes to an end, maybe with a little view across the meadow here on the left. Another ancient meadow, and behind all these various cars and things you can see some really big trees. Oak stumps, hollow trees, fallen over trees, carved trees, and new ones coming up too. So all sides of the life of an oak. Right, I think that's the end of our walk.